So today, inshallah, we're going to be looking at the section that Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah discusses love of this life. He says, الأصل السابع في حب الدنيا واعلم أن حب الدنيا رأس كل خطيئة وليس الدنيا عبارة عن المال والجاه فقط بل هما حظان من حظوظ الدنيا وشعبتان من شعبها وشعب الدنيا كثيرة. So Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah, he discusses love of this life and fondness of this life, and he starts off by saying, know that love of this life is the basis for every mistake that a person falls into. When he says khati'ah here, more specifically a sin, the basis of sin is love of this life when you think about it. And he says love of this life is not simply love of wealth or status, as we might assume. He says, but they are simply two branches or two portions of this life, of the dunya, from its many portions, and two branches from its many branches. And he says that the branches of the dunya, or the pathways of the dunya, are many, they are numerous. And it's a point to reflect upon, the love of this life being the basis of our mistakes or our sins, because it means that if we can detach ourselves from this life and we can learn to connect ourselves to the akhirah and remove the love of this life that we have in our hearts from our hearts, then it will aid us in leaving off sin. Then he says, وَدُنْيَاكَ عِبَارَةٌ عَنْ حَالَتِكَ قَبْلَ الْمَوْتِ وَآخِرَتُكَ عِبَارَةٌ عَنْ حَالَتِكَ بَعْدَ الْمَوْتِ. He says that your dunya is basically what your life is prior to your death, or your state is prior to your death, and your akhirah is the state that you will be in after death. Then he says, وَكُلُّ مَا لَكَ فِيهِ حَظٌّ قَبْلَ الْمَوْتِ فَهُوَ مِن دُنْيَاكَ. Everything wherein you have a portion prior to death is your dunya. So wherever you have placed your fingers basically in this life, that is to be considered your dunya. إِلَّا الْعِلْمَ وَالْمَعْرِفَةَ وَالْحُرِّيَّةَ وَمَا يَبْقَى مَعَكَ بَعْدَ الْمَوْتِ. He says, except for knowledge. Here he says ilm and ma'rifah. Ilm here means knowledge, the knowledge of the sciences of Islam, and knowledge which can pertain to the sciences of this worldly life if they are for the correct purpose and meaning. He says, well, ma'rifah. Ma'rifah here, it basically means to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we discussed this previously. You would often find the ulama, they refer to those who know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as al-arifun, the knowers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those who know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not in theory alone, but in practice. They know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all areas of their lives. They have a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They have an intimate relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all aspects of their lives. He says, so knowledge and ma'rifah, they're not to be considered portions of this dunya. Why? Because they relate to your akhirah. Wal hurriya, and I cannot say that I'm certain what he means here by this, wal hurriya, but we can continue inshallah. وَمَا يَبْقَى al-hurriya, it means basically freedom or to be liberated, but I'm not sure 100% what he means in this context. So he could mean, for example, your hurriya, as in you've been liberated from this dunya through your deen, but Allahu a'lam. He says, وَمَا يَبْقَى مَعَكَ بَعْدَ الْمَوْتِ, and that which will remain with you after your death. So these four things, العلم والمعرفة والحرية وما يبقى بعد الموت معك, that which will remain with you after your death, i.e. your good deeds, that which you've sent to your akhirah. You receive wealth in this life, you spend it in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so you are sending it to your akhirah. It will be waiting for you when you transition into the next life. Then he says, فإنها أيضا لذيذة عند أهل البصائر ولكنها ليست من الدنيا وإن كانت في الدنيا. So when referring to these four things, he says they are sweet with the people who have understanding, and although they are sweet, they are not from this dunya, even though they share the quality of being sweet, like other things of this dunya. Why is it that you fall to your desires? Why is it that we fall victim to the temptation of our desires, the temptation of lust, the temptation of hunger, the temptation of thirst. And when I say hunger and thirst, I mean overconsumption, intoxicating drinks, and so on and so forth. The temptation of accumulation of wealth, even if it's through haram means. Why do we fall victim to these things? Because they're sweet in taste. They taste good, they feel good, they're pleasurable. He's saying even though these things, that there is a quality of pleasure within them. For example, knowledge. The person who has studied will know, learning new things, it gives you a satisfaction. There's a sweetness of knowing. And likewise, knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's a sweetness in the relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us all to experience that. Likewise, doing good deeds, etc. There's a sweetness to it. When you give sadaqah, you feel good about the sadaqah you've given. You feel good about yourself. So he's saying even though these things, they do feel good, they are not from this dunya, they relate to the akhirah. Then he says, وَلِهَذِهِ الْحُظُوظِ الدُّنْيَوِيَّةِ تَعَاوُنٌ وَتَعَلُّقٌ بِكَ وَتَعَلُّقٌ بِمَا فِيهِ الْحَظِّ وَتَعَلُّقٌ بِأَعْمَالِكَ الْمُتَعَلِّقَةِ بِإِصْلَاحِهَا فهي ترجع إلى أعيان موجودة وإلى حظك منها وإلى شغلك في إصلاحها. So he basically says that this dunya now, the portions we have from this dunya can be categorized into three things. He says أعيان موجودة. So a'yan, basically, a'inu shay is like the tangible property of something. So a'yan is physical aspects. Then he says وَحَظِّكَ وَإِلَى حَظِّكَ مِنْهَا, and your portion. He's going to discuss this shortly, inshallah. But basically, that which your heart finds fondness of in this dunya. He says وَإِلَى شُغْلِكَ فِي إِصْلَاحِهَا, and your basically your career, you could say, or that which busies you daily, even if it's not a career, it might be an interest or a hobby or something of the sort, but it's that which busies you daily, which can be understood to be from Islah al-Dunya. So Islah al-Dunya here, he's referring about Imran al-Dunya, Imarat al-Dunya, where we are building and constructing and tending to this dunya. So these are three categories that things can fall into. He says فَأَمَّا الْأَعْيَانِ. So now he's going to go through these three categories. فَهِيَ الْأَرْضُ وَمَا عَلَيْهَا. قال الله تعالى إِنَّا جَعَلْنَا مَا عَلَى الْأَرْضِ زِينَةً لَهَا لِنَبْلُوَهُمْ أَيُّهُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. So he says that the a'yan is basically that which is upon the earth. Everything that is upon the earth is from the a'yan al-dunya. And he gives the principle in relation to these things. How should we interact with these things? He says the a'yan are that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed here for beautification. That's it. As a means of test. It's a means of testing us. Are we going to fall victim and be enticed by the beauty of this dunya, or are we going to remind ourselves of our purpose here and continue upon our path and pass the test? Then he says وَمَطْلُوبُ الْآدَمِي مِنَ الْأَرْضِ. So now he's going to basically summarize how we're supposed to interact with this dunya. إما عينها فللمسكن والمحرث وإما نباتها فللتداوي والاقتيات وإما معادنها فللنقود والأواني والآلات وإما حيواناتها فللمركب والمأكل وإما الآدميون فللمنكح والاستسخار. So he says that from this dunya you have basically that which has been created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for consumption, for growing, and that which we eat and we drink, minerals, precious stones. So they're to be used for trade, transaction, bartering, utensils, etc. Animals, so they've been created as a means of riding, transport, eating, etc. And then he says, "Wal adamiyun." So we as well are from the a'yan of this earth, and we are here as a test to each other, of course. But how do we interact with each other? With companionship, marriage, all of the different types of relationships that we have. Then he says, وَقَدْ جَمَعَ اللَّهُ سُبْحَانَهُ ذَلِكَ فِي قَوْلِهِ زُيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ حُبُّ الشَّهَوَاتِ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ وَالْبَنِينَ وَالْقَنَاطِيرِ الْمُقَنطَرَةِ, etc. to the end of the verse in Surah Ali Imran. Then he says, وَأَمَّا حَظُّكَ مِنْهَا فَقَدْ عَبَّرَ الْقُرْآنُ الْكَرِيمُ عَنْهَا بِالْهَوَى فقال الله تعالى ونهى النفس عن الهوى وقال مفصلا له أنما الحياة الدنيا لعب ولهو وزينة وتفاخر بينكم وتكاثر في الأموال والأولاد. So the hadh that he's referring to is basically our attachment to this life. That which we are attached to in this life is our hadh, the portion of this life that we have and we're attached to. And he mentions the verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says that this dunya is la'ibun wa lahu. It's basically play and leisure. And today, the culture that we have adopted today as a society, perhaps to some extent a globalized society, is one of entertainment and play. We want to be entertained constantly. We always want to have something that we're streaming into our hearts, whether it's a TV show, a film, a computer game, something that we're listening to. There's always something that we want to have in front of us or plugged into our ears, entertaining us. And that's, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, this life is just entertainment and leisure. It's a passing moment. He says, فقال الله تعالى ولهو وزينة وتفاخر, and beautification and tafakhur, competitiveness between us. Tafakhur is showing off. Look what I have. And someone else say, well, look what I have. You know, someone gets the new latest phone. Someone else gets another phone. Another company comes out and says our phone is better than their phone. Tafakhur. He says, بينكم وتكاثر. تكاثر في الأموال والأولاد. And basically your endeavors to accumulate as much wealth and offspring as possible. Perhaps today offspring is not something that people compete in, or the culture today is to have a two-childed home, or 3, or maybe 4 in some families. But previously families would have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 children, and that would be something to be proud of. And parents would show off, look at my son, he's this, and look at my daughter, she's doing this, etc. So that's what this dunya is, in summary and in brief. It's a momentary passing circumstance which is full of entertainment and play, which is worthless, and competitiveness, the endeavor to increase and accumulate as much wealth and offspring as possible, etc. That's what you see people chasing after when they're chasing this dunya, and it's all worthless. He says, وَذَلِكَ يَنْدَرِجُ فِيهِ جَمِيعُ الْمُهْلِكَاتِ الْبَاطِنَةِ. It's all worthless unless the correct intention is there, the correct purpose behind those things are there, just as a disclaimer. He says, وَذَلِكَ يَنْدَرِجُ فِيهِ جَمِيعُ الْمُهْلِكَاتِ الْبَاطِنَةِ. So beneath this, i.e. beneath the dunya and love of the dunya and chasing after the dunya, he says all of the destructive internal elements that he discusses in this book and in other places can be seen or can be found, or they all fall under this. So what does he mean by that? Al-muhlikat al-batina, kibr, riya, ujub, hiqd, hasad, bughd, all of these illnesses and sicknesses of the heart, love of the self, hatred for others, envy of others, showing off, miserliness, all of these things. Where do they all stem from? He's saying they all stem from love of this dunya. For the person who has detached himself from this dunya, he's not going to be jealous of those who have acquired something in this dunya. Why? Because he's not trying to achieve this dunya anyway. He's not going to have hatred for others, because usually it stems around something related to this dunya. He's not going to be muta'ajjibun bi nafsi. He's not going to be amazed with himself. Why? Because what is he amazed at? He's achieved something in this dunya, but he has no concern for this dunya, and so on and so forth. So he's saying the basis for these sicknesses that destroy us, internal sicknesses, love of the dunya. If we can detach ourselves from this dunya, then we can take a shortcut in cleansing our heart of the various sicknesses that potentially lie within. He says, so he gives some examples as we just did. He says, وَحُبُّ الدُّنْيَا وَحُبُّ الثَّنَاءِ وَهِيَ الدُّنْيَةُ الْبَاطِنَةِ. Love of basically everything in this life, and love of praise is the dunya al-batina, the unseen form of this dunya. And he says, وَالْأَعْيَانِ هِيَ الدُّنْيَةُ الظَّاهِرَةِ. And that which is tangible, is physical, is the literal physical elements of this dunya. So he's saying the dunya has two main areas: the unseen and the seen. The unseen being you can't physically touch it, but it's there. Love of praise, love of wealth, love of other such things. He says, and the tangible, that which is physical, that which we own, that which we possess, that which we chase after. And then he goes on to say, وَأَمَّا شُغْلُكَ فِي إِصْلَاحِهَا فَهِيَ جُمْلَةُ الْحِرَفِ وَالصِّنَاعَاتِ الَّتِي الْخَلْقُ مَشْغُولُونَ بِهَا. He says, as for your career, your job, your industry that busies you in this dunya, he says it's basically most of the career paths which people take. And you'll find people in this dunya, they fall victim to their desires, to their careers, to multiple areas. Those that chase after their promotions and they want to achieve high status in their particular careers, etc., spend a lifetime running after those particular statuses. Does it benefit them in the akhirah? No. Can it benefit in the akhirah? Yes, if the person, because we're talking about generally, we're not talking about people that have the right intention. If a person has the correct intention and they're trying to achieve a particular position for the functionality that that position will give them in aiding the circumstance of the ummah, etc., then that's praiseworthy. But usually it's not for that cause. It's for status, it's for showing off, it's for a sense of fulfillment and achievement. It's for the financial gains attached, etc. He says most of the creation you find, they're busied with this category, i.e. busied on in tending to that which is falls under construction of this earth, construction upon this earth, building upon this earth, tending to this earth as if we're going to live here for eternity. He says, وَقَدْ نَسُوا فِيهَا أَنفُسَهُمْ وَمَبْدَأَهُمْ وَمَعَادَهُم. And in doing so, they forgot themselves, and they forgot their beginning, and they forgot their end, where they're going. And that's literally what happens. You see people lose themselves to their jobs, their hobbies, their distractions that they're distracting themselves with. They lose themselves until people no longer know who they are and what they are. If you ask a person who you are, what you are, they won't be able to tell you according to the reality, because they don't know anymore. We become distracted from the reality of our existence, which is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to serve that which is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so on and so forth. And they forget their beginning, where they came from, and they forget where they're going. They don't consider the consequences of their actions in the next life. And that's the reality that you have today. And what happens when this becomes the human state? Today is an example of that. Anything goes. There's no consequences. Morality is a question. The boundaries that were once in place become blurred because we've forgotten who we are, where we come from, and where we're going. So we can be whatever we want to be. We can go wherever we want to go. We've stripped ourselves of the consequences of our existence. Every existence has responsibility, has a consequence to its existence. But when we forget who we are, we make up where we've come from. We came from a bang, we came from nothing, and we forget where we're going. We're not going to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're not going to be held accountable. Anything goes. And the strongest word is the one who has the most power behind him or her. And that's what we're seeing today. He says, لاستغراقهم باشتغالهم بها وإنما شاغلهم العلاقة فإن علاقة القلب بحب حضورها وعلاقة البدن بشغل إصلاحها. So he says they've lost themselves, they're drowning in this life, and that which has drowned them, basically that which has busied them, is al-alaqa. And there's a footnote here mentioning that the alaqa is basically the literal attachment of the heart to this life. So the attachment of the heart to this life has basically busied them from contemplating over anything else, and the attachment of their bodies to their physical construction upon this earth through whatever career it is that they're busy with has also made them forget the reality and where they're going. So you find a person's heart is attached to the dunya, and their body is likewise attached to the dunya. Then he says, فهذه هي حقيقة الدنيا التي حبها رأس كل خطيئة وإنما خلقت للتزاود منها إلى الآخرة ولكن كثرة أشغالها وفنون شهواتها أنست الحمقى سفرهم ومقصدهم. So he says this is the reality of this dunya, and why this dunya is the basis for every mistake and sin. He says, but this dunya really has been created للتزود. Tazawwud is basically when you're traveling and you stop off at a service station, and you take what you need for your journey. It's to take what you need for your journey. Al-Ghazali is saying that's what this dunya is for. We're not here for a long time. We're here simply to take what we need for our journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he's going to give more example. He says, but due to the amount of distractions and the beautification and the various types of pleasures that are here in this dunya, we become busy from remembering where we're going and remembering our journey. He says, فقصروا عليها همتهم فكانوا كالحاج في البادية يشتغل بالتعهد أو بتعهد الناقة وعلفها وتسمينها فيتخلف عن الرفقة حتى يفوته الحج وتهلكه سباع البادية. So he gives an example. He says it's like the person who's traveling for Hajj, and he's speaking of course in the context that he lived. Previously people would go out in a caravan of various travelers. He's so busy with his riding beast, his camel, fattening it up and making sure that it has the right equipment on its side and tending to it, etc. He's so busy by tending to his camel that he forgets the journey, and his companions leave him. The caravan leaves and he's still stuck there tending to his camel, and he realizes that his caravan has left him, so he misses out on Hajj, and he's eaten by the predators that live in that region, the desert region that he was currently residing in, momentarily anyway. So he's saying that's what this dunya is like. If you tend to the medium, you forget the goal. This dunya is a medium of achieving the goal. It's a means of reaching our destination. If we busy ourselves with the means, we'll miss out on reaching the goal. And that's what happens. And that's why you find young brothers and sisters, mashallah, they have that passion, that zeal, that energy, that focus on the akhirah. Whereas the older we get, we start to lose it. Why? Because our feet become more deep rooted in this earth, and we become more attached to the dunya as we grow into the dunya. So reminding ourselves of our reality, where we're going, it's very important. And detaching ourselves from this place, because we're not going to be here for very long. This life is going to go on without us. The sky is going to be blue without us. The trees are going to lose their leaves in the winter and regrow them again in the spring and the summer without us. The advertisements that we see are going to go on without us. All of these things that we take to be a part of our lives, they're going to continue once we're gone. We're not going to be here for very long. So detaching ourselves from this place and attaching ourselves to our true resting place, our true place of residence, will help us to rid our heart of the illnesses and the issues that lie therein. If a person, for example, steals from you and you're attached to this dunya, you're going to be hurt by the fact that this person has stolen from you. You're going to take it personally. You're going to want to get back whatever it is they've stolen from you because of the principle of the matter. But if your heart's detached from this dunya and you're traveling to the akhirah anyway, you'll be much more easygoing. You'll say, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive him. Maybe it was meant to be his in the first place. Because you're not concerned with this dunya. You don't have attachment to it. And it's a very simple example, but apply it across the board. Then he says في كون الدنيا مزرعة الآخرة في حق من عرفها. هذه الدنيا المذمومة المهلكة هي بعينها مزرعة الآخرة في حق من عرفها، إذ يعرف أنها منزل من منازل السائرين إلى الله تعالى، وهي كرباط بني على قارعة الطريق أعد فيها العلف والزاد وأسباب السفر، فمن تزود منها لآخرته واقتصر منها على قدر الضرورة التي ذكرناها في المطعم والملبس والمنكح وسائر الضرورات فقد حرث وبذر. So now basically he says that this dunya, the reality of this dunya, is like a field that has been prepared for us to grow our crops. And this is according to those who understand what this dunya is like. The person who doesn't know what this dunya is for, they don't know their purpose in this dunya, they'll try to attain as much of it as possible and enjoy as much of the entertainments that this dunya can offer as possible. Why? Because they don't know what the purpose of this dunya is. But the one who knows the reality of this dunya, they see this dunya as a growing field where they can plant their seeds and grow their crops and harvest those crops in the akhirah. And that's how we should see it. And he says they'll see it as a ribat, buni ala qari'at al-tariq. They'll see it as like a station, a service station, built upon the side of the road, on the journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's here for us to restock on that which we need on our journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, but the one who, he says, وَمَنْ عَرَجَ عَلَيْهَا وَاشْتَغْلَ بِلَذَّاتِهَا هَلَكَ. So the one who doesn't understand what this dunya is for, he arrives at the service station and he starts to try to build a house there. He starts to take advantage of all of the various shop fronts available to him. And he becomes lost in that place and he never makes it out of the service station. He never gets to complete his journey because he becomes attached to the service station. So he forgets the destination that he was trying to arrive at in the first place. And that's what this dunya is. And the longer we stay here, the more easy it is to become attached to this service station. If we don't remind ourselves of where we're going. The person who has lived his life on this journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or at least a portion of the journey to Allah is within this dunya, back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when death comes to them, they'll be happy because they've been waiting for their moment to leave this life. They've been waiting for their car to be serviced so they can get back on the road and travel towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the person who's tried to build a house here, they'll be distraught and distressed because they were trying to settle here. They were trying to make this place their home. And so we have to try to remind ourselves why we're here, detach ourselves from this life. As the saying goes, الدنيا سجن المؤمن وجنة الكافر. That this dunya is a prison for the believer and a paradise for the non-believer. Why? Because for the believer, he imprisons his nafs. He prevents himself from being entertained, from the pleasures, from indulging. Why? So that he can remain on his journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when death comes, he gets to indulge in everything that he gave up in this dunya. Whereas for the non-believer, this dunya is like a paradise. They want to achieve and acquire as much of it as possible. They want things at the touch of a screen. They want food to come to the doorstep. They want illicit behavior, fulfillment of the private part to come to the doorstep. They want constant entertainment, constant enjoyment, constant pleasure, constant happiness. But as believers, we know that's not achievable in this life. So we give it up so that we can have that which is waiting for us in the akhirah. And then he gives another example, which I'll just summarize, and we'll end with that inshallah, of the creation. He says the creation meaning mankind and jinn. He says they're like the example of people who got on a boat, and the boat is traveling, and the head sailor brings the boat to an island. He brings the boat to an island to restock. Because remember, this author, rahimahullah, he's living in the 5th century. So they don't have the types of technologies that we have today, where you can go on a 2-week, 3-week cruise without ever leaving the ocean. Why someone would want to do that, I don't know, to be honest. I've never understood why someone would want to go traveling on the ocean for 3 weeks without touching land. Doesn't sound like a holiday. It sounds more like a prison. But so Al-Ghazali, he says, it's like the example of a boat, and everyone's on the boat. The head sailor says, we need to stop at this island, and we need to restock. So they stop, and the head sailor says to them, you've got a limited time. You need to be back on the boat in a few hours' time. And so he says some of the people on board, they go into the island, they do what they need to do, they acquire what they need to acquire quickly for their journey, and they get back on the boat. And they find massive amount of space. They can take any part of the boat now that they want, because the space is free. He says another part of those who are on the boat, they become busied enjoying the sights. They see all of the tropical birds and the wonderful fruits and the beautiful trees, and they become amazed, and they want to try to enjoy the highlights before they get back onto the boat. But they realize time's running up, so they quickly rush back, and they find that place has been taken up. So there's that which is available to them now is more restricted. So they have to take a restricted part of the boat. He says, then there's another portion of these people, another group of these people, who, like the second group, they're amazed with what they see. And they don't only want to take in the sights, they want to take a souvenir. So they try to take a rock from this island with them onto the boat, but it's heavy. And so when they get onto the boat, they're told, because it's taken them time to get the rock onto the boat with them, they're told there's no space for your souvenirs here. So some of them, reluctantly, they'll give up their souvenirs, but now they've got a very restricted part on the boat. Others, they're not willing to give up the souvenirs, and so they perish. And he says another group, the final group from those who got off the boat, they become so amazed with this island and the fruits, the birds, the scenery, they forget that the boat is going to leave, because they're busy just taking in the sights. And before they realize it, the boat has gone, they're stuck on the island, and they perish. He says that's the example of this dunya. The example of this dunya is like the boat. For those that remember their purpose, they take what they need and they rush back onto the boat towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those who they take in the sights, but they remind themselves, they rush back onto the boat, they find a place. Then there are those that try to take some of this dunya with them. It's not possible. Then there are those that completely forget that the boat is waiting for them in the first place, and they face destruction. So we want to be from that first group. We want to remind ourselves that we're on this boat traveling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and our purpose is not to take in the sights on this wonderful island that we call the dunya. It's amazing, but rather than taking the sights, we should be reminded by the sights of our journey. When we see the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation, it should remind us of Allah's existence and that we're going to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we should take from this dunya what we need for our journey, i.e. sow our seeds so that we can harvest the crops in the akhirah. The good deeds are our, we're restocking with our good deeds, and we're taking what we need to perform those good deeds. So ideally, we should sleep enough to worship, eat enough to worship, and so on and so forth. But today, and this is something, again, we spoke about it briefly before, it's so important to look at society and understand the state that we're in, because today, society is built upon, capitalism is built upon, consumerism is built upon overindulging, trying to get people to indulge as much as possible, because the more people indulge, the more profit there is to be made. And so we're being conditioned to eat as much as we can and as much as we want, to watch as much as we can and as much as we want, to drink as much as we can, as much as we want, to consume as much as we can and as much as we want. Likewise, to engage in illicit behavior, relationships of nowadays between not only opposite gender but all types of genders. Why? Because it's, at the end of the day, it's profitable for those that are conditioning society currently. So we have to remind ourselves of our purpose and learn to say no to ourselves, learn to detach ourselves from this dunya. And if we were to do that, our situation would change. When we look across the world today and we see the oppression that's taking place in the name of consumerism, how much does it cost to produce a fashion brand item of clothing that we are quickly buying and we're happy to purchase? How much does it cost to produce it? Pennies. How much is the person that produces it paid? Pennies. Nowadays, some places not even paid. Likewise, our technology. Likewise, our food. All of these things, the oppression taking place across the earth today, stemming from our love of this dunya, because we want to consume as much as possible. And so the demand has become monstrous, and so the supply has to meet the demand. And that's not even taken into equation the supply that's deemed to be surplus and thrown out in our homes and in shops, etc. So detaching from this dunya, it's important. And the month of Ramadan is a reminder. Look, we don't need that much. For those that aren't overeating in the evening, we don't need that much. You have a meal and it's okay. For those that drank many cups of tea and coffee daily, 1 cup, 2 cups, you're okay. For those that would engage in certain things outside of Ramadan, they're not doing them inside of Ramadan. For example, those who smoke, they're smoking outside of Ramadan, they have to smoke a lot. Inside of Ramadan, they don't have to smoke, except a few cigarettes in the evening, for example. We can live a lot more simply than we currently are outside of Ramadan. And Ramadan is a reminder to us. And if we can do it for 1 month of the year, we can take that mindset outside of the month of Ramadan and live that wholesome, upright life that we should be living, and be examples to others in a time where the world is crying out for help. Literally, physically, the world is crying for help. The consequences of our consumption can be seen now on the earth. The oppression taking place on the earth, on people, etc. We have the answer. We simply need to be the right examples with that answer. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make that the case. And we'll end with that, inshaAllah. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. If there are any questions, maybe 2 minutes, inshaAllah.
How can someone strike a balance between, for example, they have some wealth, but then they don't want to be too much in the dunya? So, for example, clothes and stuff like that. Like they can afford more, but then they still get the minimum amount. For example, not designer brands.
Yeah.
They're like a millionaire, for example, and they still, like, for example, most of the rich people in the world, they still wear like old clothes and they don't buy designer brands, stuff like that. So
Yeah.
how can someone strike a balance? Because obviously, Allah says in the Quran to show your blessings, isn't it? So how can someone, for example, strike a balance?
What would you say if someone bought a £300 pair of shoes, for example?
Meaning?
What would your opinion be of that?
It depends on obviously if they can afford it, or if they basically spend their whole wages on shoes or something.
Yeah, so that's the way to look at it, if they can afford it and the purpose behind it. Like, for example, if a person were to spend £350 on a pair of shoes, but that pair of shoes were to last them for 5, 6, 7 years, then that's a very good investment. And not only that, when you buy a good quality pair of shoes, you can take them get fixed. They can resole them and so on and so forth. So it's like a lifetime investment. Likewise, you could do the same with a watch. Likewise with coats. Likewise with suits. If you buy quality items, those quality items will last a lifetime. If that's the approach, that's fine. But if the approach is one where you want the like you said, the name for the name's sake, you want the item for the fashionability of that item, that's where the problem lies. And showing our blessings, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to wear our blessings on our chest. It means that if you're wealthy and you dress like a poor man, that's problematic. If you're wealthy but you dress in a way people would assume you're poor, that's problematic. But if you dress according to the standards of society, there's no problem in that. If you dress according to that which is acceptable in society, then it's no issue. So the best approach is to buy for the quality with the intention of investing in these items to last a lifetime, and only rebuying when the necessity pops up. So if I have 2 pairs of good quality shoes, or 3 maybe, that's enough. Why do I need to have 4, 5, 6, 7? Why do I have to have these limited editions? Who said, what if they're limited edition? What's the, so what? Why do I have to have, as I said before, a £500 winter jacket when we're living in London? The temperature, it drops to -2, 3 at night. I'm going to quickly put it on and run out to benefit from the warmth. No, it's not for quality there. It's the brand. You can buy a jacket which is a lot cheaper and it has the same level of quality, etc. But at the same time, it's not that's an ideal. The standard should be something else. The ideal should be that we live according to our means, and we live with intention, with purpose. I only buy something because I need it, because there's a necessity behind it. It's not because I like to collect these things. That's where it can become problematic.
See, this is about, I'm going to say exactly what you're talking about now. So if I'm working, say I work,
Yeah,
I give my Sadaqah,
yeah,
I'm a stand-up person, but I'm working,
yeah.
and I buy something that I like out of my money. Is that bad?
No, that's not. It's not bad.
Because I've realised that the problem isn't with the person, it's normally people looking at the person. So like, the person might just be, their intentions, it's just to buy something they like, that's it.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
But the person looking at that person doesn't like it, and they're thinking, why does he have to buy that? Why can't he just buy it down? He doesn't want to buy it.
No, that's
You should be able to treat yourself.
That's a good point. The point that needs to be reflected upon. When we talk about these issues, we should make ourselves the center point of our focus. At no point should I be thinking, you know what, that brother or that sister, they're always buying nice items. I need to tell them about this. No, we need to tell ourselves. So if someone's got that judgmental mindset, that's problematic. If I see someone who's always wearing a fresh, jacket, for example, they've got nice clothes, then I should assume this person, they can afford it, and they're doing a lot of other good deeds, Sadaqah, etc., etc., etc. The ideals that we set should be for ourselves, not for others. But if we're speaking collectively, the issue is, like when we say, treat ourselves, where does that statement come from? You see, like if it's a one-off, every now and again, there's nothing wrong with that. But nowadays, it's become where people are
You're talking about extravagance.
Exactly, extravagance.
I'm not talking about that.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, because I was always against, all of this, buying unnecessarily. But then there was someone said it to me today, and it really hit home, because this person is a nurse, she works really hard.
Yeah.
Very hard. If you see the hours that she works, man, do you understand? And she treated herself to some things, and what it is, the people around her are like, she's such a shower.
Yeah, but that's the problem. That's the problem of the people.
I actually took her side today. She said, you know what? I worked my arse off, and I brought this thing because I like this thing, and all of her people around her just, got something to say.
No,
they don't know the hours.
Yeah, but that, again, with individual situations, we're talking collectively and generally. If a person buys something that they like every now and again, there's no problem with that. But if we're...
But people see a problem with that.
Yeah, but I'm not concerned with people, to be honest with you, because...
That's what we're talking about.
No, there's a statement, رضا الناس غاية لا تدرك, that the pleasure of people is something that you'll never attain.
But she's not buying it for pleasure.
But that's what I'm saying. So it's...
When she's working hard, this is what makes her happy, that she actually could afford this with her own money.
No, what I'm saying is developing that mindset that, people are going to judge. Let them judge. But at the same time,
people judge you.
It's true, but at the same time, there has to be a standard, so not this case aside, I'm not speaking about this case. I'm saying the culture that has developed now, where you have people, they've got 2-3 pairs of trainers, they'll buy another pair because it's a collector's edition. You know, they've got, for example, they've got 2 or 3 games consoles in their house. You know, they've got multiple TVs in their house. You know, the lifestyles that we're living are excessive. And when we contextualize the way we live, especially in Western Europe, in comparison to what's happening on a global scale, is it justifiable? You know, like we have people starving, hungry globally, and yet we're indulging. You know, we're grazing, literally grazing. Even with that, like I want to treat myself. Let's say if we were to cut out on the treats for a year and send that money to poor countries, whatever poor country is, poverty will probably be wiped out. It's not to criminalize that person. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, like, if we look at it from another perspective, if we look at the state of the world today, then sometimes it does become hard to justify, you know, the way that we're living. According to society standards, yeah, it's okay, but on a global scale, you know, like, again, I'm talking about ideals. You know, there's a difference between ideals and standards. The ideal is something we should aspire towards, but the standard should be فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَسْتَطَعْتُمْ. If a person, their income is halal, you know, that which they're wearing is halal, that which they own is halal, then that's a good starting point. You know, they're not being excessive when they are buying things for themselves. They're not being excessive in buying things for themselves. That's a standard. But the ideal is something else. We're talking about an ideal here. Alaykum salam. How many people can we say have cut themselves off from the dunya? That's an ideal. It's a very difficult ideal to reach.
But you see what you're saying now, yeah, Imam, yeah? I totally agree with you. I'm not saying that. You are right.
Nice.
You're talking from, you know, from Quran and Hadith. So this is not you just making it up. This is teaching of our deen, yeah? What I'm saying is this. There has to be a balance in everything.
Definitely.
Yeah. So as much as we mustn't be attached to this dunya, we still have to have some kind of love for this dunya, because Allah created this dunya. Yeah? He created this earth, yeah, and the people on this earth. So if there's people starving in another country, I'm sending the money over, or food, whatever it is, because I love them for the sake of Allah. So there is a balance in the love, isn't there?
Yeah, there are different types of love, but he's referring to love of this actual tangible, you know, the dunya, not the people. But forgive me because I have an appointment now, so I don't want to keep them waiting. But on Wednesday, inshallah, we'll be back, inshallah. Salam.